those of you, I mean, you've heard about LTPD, developed by Hockey Canada, the long-term player development model. And there's a few things I need you to know about this concept. And I won't go into it into details. I'm sure you've listened to presentations on this before. I think Steve Norris came and talked about this. He's one of the world experts on the topic. But there's a couple of things to remember. The first thing is that at the base, at the foundation of the LTPD approach is physical literacy. So what the model prescribes is that before specializing in hockey, kids should develop physical literacy or acquire a multitude of different skills that will serve them in two ways. First of all, it's the foundation of making better players. That's really important. But the second thing is if you look at the Canadian Sport for Life model on the left, kids make choices. Kids that are physically literate, if they become athletes, are more likely to be better athletes. And I'll show you the stats about this after. But the other thing that's really cool is that when they choose not to be players, when they choose not to compete anymore, and they switch over into the non-competitive stream, they're more likely to be active for life. So the answer to your question is simple. We've got to really stand up and demand that our schools, our sport organizations, our daycares put an emphasis on developing physical literacy in kids. We're at the time in our development where saying just tell the kids to go out and play is not enough. It worked in our time, it worked for my mom, but it doesn't work today. I cannot emphasize that message enough. Now, before I go a bit further, I want to clarify some concept about the LTPD approach. First of all, there's something called early specialization, okay? And early specialization doesn't mean you can't play spring hockey. I know it's a bad word, spring hockey, ooh. But it means that you cannot do one thing to the exclusion of other activities. So if your kid is a great ping pong player, and you structure the kid's life so all he does is play ping pong, and he can't do anything else, that's bad, especially before puberty. So that's what early specialization is about. The second thing to understand is that hockey is a late specialization sport, which means you need to specialize in hockey after puberty or when you hit puberty. So most likely you don't really specialize until, depending on your developmental age, probably bantam is the time to really specialize in hockey. And even then, it doesn't mean that specialization means that you stop doing everything else. We did a survey with the national junior teams when the World Championships were in Calgary, and 75% of these guys, and we're talking about the best juniors in the country, at the time were playing other sport as well. They did not only do hockey. The last concept that's important is something called sampling. Sampling is when a kid practices at least 3 activities or sport in a year. So for example, my son plays hockey, he did gymnastics one day a week, and he did skiing one night a week. That would be called sampling. It'd be easy for me to say just play hockey. The coach didn't like the fact that on Friday nights Max was skiing. He didn't like that sometimes he was a bit tired on Saturday, but you know what? He's only 11. So we had that discussion, and the coach understood and agreed. So that is called sampling, when you do at least 3 activities. So here are the stats. So what I did before this presentation, I went to a few of our academics, and I asked them, okay, I'm going to talk to this group about the importance of LTPD and physical literacy and developing multi-sport athlete. What stats can I share with them? And these are the outcome of the most recent studies in this field. An early sport specialization in a sport where you're supposed to specialize late predicts an early exit from that sport. So what that means is that the kids that specialize too early in hockey, as a sports psychology consultant, I get the phone call. Hi, can you help my son or my daughter? Sure, what's his or her problem? Well, she wants to drop out of hockey. Okay. How old is she? 14. Okay? What can you do for her? Probably not much. If she's played nothing else, she's probably sick of the game, and you've probably pushed her too much. There's not much I can do at that point. And believe me, I do get these phone calls. I want you to make sure that my son doesn't drop out of hockey. Sorry, I can't help you. Now, that's the negative side. On the positive side, when you look at kids, okay, they did this study where they look at kids that were engaged in sampling. So that means at the age of 11, 13, and 15, they polled these kids, and these kids were practicing at least 3 sports. These kids were much more likely to play at the national level in one sport when they hit 16 to 18, okay? So if you look at our future junior team or our future women's team, look what they were doing at 11, 13, and 15, and chances are that those that were sampling, i.e. practicing more than one sport, are more likely to play at the higher level. There's a growing set of evidence about the long-term benefits of playing many sports. You know, we're talking about increased longevity in sport. That means that someone will play hockey for life. One of my goals when I was coaching Novice and Adam was to create players for life. I didn't really care about creating NHL players. Some might be there one day, but I really wanted to create players for life. I really want these kids to not only develop their skills, but develop the love of the game. And by the way, one thing we realized too is that when you say, I want kids to have fun, one of the key elements of fun for kids is when they acquire a skill. If you ask kids, what do you find fun about what you're doing? They'll say, well, I'm learning new things. So a system at Pee Wee's may be not the best thing to do only. You know, without your fundamental skills, your system falls apart. And like I witnessed in my son and his coach this year, it's not fun for the kids to spend hours upon hours doing endless, flow drills to learn a system when they're not developing their skills. Now, this is really interesting. I don't know if any of you know Dean Krillers. He's one of the leading researchers in physical literacy. He works with Accept Soleil and so on, and I talk to Dr. Dean all the time. He writes articles for Active for Life. And he told me one day, he said, you know what, kids that are physically literate, what my studies are showing now is they make less mistakes in sport. I said, what do you mean? He said, the physically literate kids that have a good multi-sport base, when they're playing basketball, hockey, soccer, or team sport in general, make less mistakes. Why do you think that is? They transfer the skills. What else? What else? More exposure to different games. For example, I'll come back to my son. He skis. His balance is incredible. There are moments in hockey where his skiing ability, the fact that he skis on rails and stuff like that, he does crazy things I don't want to see him do anyway, but he does them. It gives him an added ability to find his balance in different positions. Steve Nash is another good example. He didn't really play organized basketball until he was 13. He played soccer before that. And I talked to him the other day. I said, how did soccer help you in basketball? I said, well, listen, when I'm playing soccer, there's 21 other guys on the field, on the pitch. 21, right? When I ended up on the soccer court and there were only 9 other guys, it was a lot easier. I could factor these 9 guys in easily. And what is his greatest skill? Well, seeing the game. So there's proof upon proof that transferable skills help you not only be a better player, but also it increases the enjoyment of the game. And then there's something called overuse stress injuries. I'll just put a little quote up there. Kids who specialize young are twice as likely to be injured compared to kids who play a variety of sports. And we're not talking about an injury where you can put ice and it goes and it's better. We're talking about repetitive stress injuries that can last a lifetime. The main study on this was done in the States about baseball players. And what's happening in the States is they're seeing players, pitchers, especially in baseball, at the age of 14 getting operations that used to be operations that you would see in men that were 36 and 37 at the end of their career. And what has changed is that these kids are throwing 1,000 balls a day year-round. Of course, their shoulders can't take it. Now, we are starting to see the same kind of injuries in hockey players, in knees and so on. Kids are not designed before puberty to specialize in one thing. When you do specialize in one thing early, things go wrong. It's that simple. Now, if you are to summarize what I've just talked about, okay, the research is clear. Kids who do multiple sports have fewer injuries, they play longer and to a higher level than children who specialize in one sport before puberty. This is why LTPD is good for every kid. It's good for the kid who's going to be your NHL guy. It's also good for the kid who might play Tier 6 hockey until Bantam and then move on to Beer League. If that kid has had a great experience, a good skill development early in life, he will most likely be a player for life. And the NHL guy that has developed a multitude of skills will probably be a better player than if they specialized early. Now, every time I present to parents, they say, well, what about Sid? There are some exceptions. Connor McDavid is one, for example. There are kids who do specialize earlier. Okay, and there's a couple of things I want to say about this. Some kids do know early. And if you talk to anyone who worked with Sidney Crosby, they could tell you the kid knew early. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. Many kids do know, but some kids really do know. The other thing they'll tell you about Sidney Crosby is that he wasn't pushed by anyone. Okay? It wasn't his dad pushing him or his mom or peer pressure. He really somehow had this passion, this deep fire burning inside. Most of these guys are still great athletes. There are very few superstars that are not great athletes. But they're not the norm. They're the outliers. Okay? And what I like to say to parents is that the exceptional player regiment, someone who practices hockey, only hockey when they're younger, is not for everyone. It's usually a good way out of the sport for most kids. There's a reason why they call these guys exceptional players, exceptional status players. It's because they're exceptional. They're not the norm. Does that make sense? Do you agree with this stuff or? Absolutely? Awesome. Now, to summarize some more, even the well-established coaches see the same thing. This is an article we published about Brett Sutter, and one of the things he's seeing at the NHL and junior and so on is that we're not getting as many good athletes as we used to, and we need to bring this back. Now, I also said that LTPD is good for coaches. Something really weird happened to me at the, I presented about this stuff at the BC Hockey AGM last year. And during my presentation, it was a bit more technical. I went into the fact that there are some key moments in the kid's development that allows to learn certain skills better, okay? There are certain moments in the kid's development that is more exceptional time to develop certain skills. And I talked about the fact that when kids are novice, you need to emphasize speed. So I talked about this, and at the end, where the question period, this guy stands up and he says, do you recognize me? I said, no, I don't. Yeah, I've met you this year. Yeah, great. Where? So, well, we played you in a tournament. So at the time I was coaching an Adam team in Banff. And he said, I believe you about your stuff that you said about speed because your team was really fast. Even your weaker players were fast. So, of course, in this kind of a setting, I felt really good, flattering my ego. And it made me look like a genius. But believe me, I'm not a genius at coaching. But here's what happened that I want to share with you. My approach to coaching novice kids was an outcome of a few things. In the summer of 2011, okay, when I was coaching novice, so that's a couple of years before, I read something suggested by someone at Canadian Sports for Life, and it went like this: hand and foot speed can be developed especially well by boys and girls during this stage. And they're talking about the fundamental stage, which is one of the stages of LTPD. If this sensitive period of accelerated adaptation to develop speed is missed, body speed later in life may be significantly compromised. So when I read this, what do you think did I do in terms of my planning of practices for the entire season? What did I emphasize all season? Hand and foot speed. So we designed a series of games that would promote hand and foot speed. Fast forward 2 years later, I've got a team of 10 kids from Banff. Some are Tier 1 players, some are Tier 6 players. But one thing across the board is they're all fast. Their skill level might be different. Their dedication to the game and their effort might be a bit different, but in their level, they're all fast. And we won a lot of games that year, not because our best player were the best. We won many games because our weaker players were better than the weaker players of the other team. So if you follow the LTPD, there's some nuggets in there that will make you look like a genius as a coach. If you teach kids the right thing at the right time, based on their development, not based on what you've learned from your coach, you learn from the coach before and so on, but really look at the science behind it a bit, and it's very simple. There's some great things in there. Cool? Hockey Canada is really engaging in this, and what they're doing is that they're actually considering the difficulty of scheduling things for kids today. In other words, kids are over-scheduled. What they're trying to do is to make hockey a bit more multi-sport. For example, they've got these spring camps at Winsport that are multi-sport camps. And you know what? The system is changing. My son is a pretty good hockey player, so what happens every spring, we get phone calls. Do you want to play on this spring team or this spring team? 3 years ago, the phone calls were, do you want to play on our spring team? We're going to win tournaments. And this year, the phone calls were different. Do you want to play on our spring team? We have a really good development program. And by the way, we've got great off-ice program. So what's happening out there, I don't know if you see the same thing, but for me at the grassroots, as a dad of a kid who plays hockey and a coach, I see things changing gradually. The wording, the words used, the discussions are a bit different. Development comes up more and more. Skill comes up more and more. Multi-sport comes up more and more. I'm really happy about this.